well, steamship to England from Denmark, and then from Liverpool. I can't remember the name of the ship right now, but they went by ship to New York, and then from New York they went by train, and it wasn't even passenger train. I think it was stock cars or something, box cars, and they went up into Canada. They routed them different because the railroad were contracted to take them to as far as the railroad went at that time, and which was Wyoming, Nebraska. Is where the train. Anyway, that's where they left the train and traveled by ox train, covered wagons. And Grandma was 4, and she had, I think there were 3 children at that time. No, that was in 1866, and Grandpa immigrated in 1872, and he didn't, the whole family didn't come together. The 3 older brothers, they came first in 1872 and worked to send money back to their parents, and Hans's twin sister, and her name was Betray, and that's Mother's. She was named after her. They must have settled in, the Jorgensens, I think, were in Fountain Green, and the Christiansens, which was Grandma's line, must have settled in Mount Pleasant. Grandpa took some nice horses down to Old Mexico, and they took their household goods by train to Deming. Maybe it was Silver City, but they're in New Mexico. And I found out later that the train didn't go south. They had to go out to San Diego or Los Angeles and then come back east to New Mexico. And then they took the horses and wagons and headed down to Old Mexico. He played the drums in the band. He was active in civic affairs. They had a farm across the river and a farmhouse, on the property. But they had the school children came into Colonia Diaz, and grandmother would stay on the farm. My grandmother, Mariah, would live on the farm during the summer, and because they had the biggest family, my grandmother and Grandpa, and so the family split. Aunt Melissa lived in town in the summer and with her family. She had, I believe there were 5 of her children, and she died in childbirth. They also not only farmed, but he worked, he helped build a railroad. He did the Fresnoing, moving the dirt with these teams, and to make the road, the bed road. And they were going to fix that so they would have a market up into the U.S. for the farm goods. Grandma cooked for the crew. Grandma Mariah. Daddy was born in Bell County, Belton, Texas, in 1896, and Mother was born in Old Mexico in Colonia Diaz, Galena, Chihuahua County, Galena County, Chihuahua State. And she was born in 1895. She's she was a year older than Daddy. When I found out about Old Mexico, I would ask Uncle Ed questions and Mother questions, but Grandma was gone by then. But they told us how they had to polish the silverware and scrub the floors, and the Saturday was a big cleaning day. And then she said she had two dresses, one that she wore to school and one that she wore to church. They farmed across the river, but they lived the big house was in Colonia Diaz. And the back of the house, looking from the back of the house, was the main street. And Uncle Art said he remembered climbing up on the top of the porch or in a tree or something and seeing the funeral processions go by. And I guess his daddy, he remembered that procession. But Grandpa died within 2 or 3 days. They called it Lock Valves. He was born in 60, I believe, in 1860, and he died in, he's about your age.
Yeah, you said 1910, so that would have made him about 50.
Yeah. 2 years later was when the revolution made them go up into the States to get out of the path of this revolutionists. He said then when they were told they had to leave Mexico real quick, his father had given him a wagon. Grandpa Eric had given him a wagon for Christmas or something, and put little, I think there was a little bed or railing that he built around it, and he used to go on errands for his grandfather. Our grandfather, his dad, he would carry things around in that wagon, and that was his very choice gift that the most fun that he ever had, the nicest thing he'd ever had. So when they were told that they had to leave Old Mexico, he climbed up in this tree, and he got that wagon up by pulling it by the tongue of the wagon, and he got it up on the tree was close to the roof of the house. In fact, the limbs and leaves and things went over the house some and shaded the house. But he got that wagon up on the roof of the house, and the house was a 2-story house. And he got it secured so it wouldn't fall off. And he thought that they would be going back. He put it up there so the Mexicans couldn't get it. Pancho Villa, I think it is. But he never went back, and he always wondered what happened to his wagon. And they thought that they took just overnight stuff with them, and they thought they were going back in a few days. They were only allowed to take out so many pounds, and I don't remember exactly what that was. It seemed to me like it was 10 or 15 pounds of...
The only thing that I recall, maybe Anita remembers more of it, but we were visiting late, but Uncle Art said that it was a rainy time when they left, and everything seemed like everything that they did, they had to fight the mud, and like with the wagons, and that the Mexicans, really what they were after the ammunition and guns there in the Mormon settlement.
I just learned recently that they were allowed to camp in Grandpa Urban's pasture, one of his fields. And I guess that's how they met.
I've never heard how Grandpa and Grandma, what caused them and the Urbans and the like to travel from southern New Mexico up to South Dakota. I asked Uncle Art that question, and Uncle Art didn't know whether the Urbans went up and Dad followed the Urbans, whether the Jorgensens went up and all of them followed each other.
Well, I heard they went up together too. They went up there to Homestead. The Jorgensens and the Urbans went up there to Homestead. And Grandma Urban said all they raised was rattlesnakes. He called Mother a cotton top. So she must have been real blonde, you know, when she was, let's see, they married in 1917, I believe, and that Mother would have been 5 and 7, 22 when they got married. They got married when they lived, I think it was Eucalacca, in the southeast corner of Montana, in that area. They were married in February. In fact, they ran away and got married because Daddy heard that the family was going, or the guys were going to chivalry them. And in those days, the chivalries were, they really played some tricks on each other, I guess. Anyway, to keep from being chivalried, they went across into, I believe, Lead, South Dakota, and were married. In the dead of the winter, you know, February is pretty cold. In fact, they said they had to get out and hold the fence down to take the team over. And then they lived for evidently that winter in Montana. Then they went down. They left Montana and went down to Deming, New Mexico, where Charles was born a year or two later. And then they went back up to Rapid City, South Dakota, and that's where Frank was born.
They homesteaded out of Eucalacca. Chuck was a baby, of course. And I was born in Rapid City because that was the closest hospital to the homestead.
There were some missionaries up there, and Daddy was converted and baptized in 1925. I was a year old. No, he was baptized. He had to be baptized earlier than that. But they went to the Salt Lake Temple and were sealed June 4th, which is my anniversary. Daddy's my anniversary. June 4th in 1925, I was a year old. So Charles, Frank, and I were sealed to Mom and Daddy in 1925, and Doris was born in 1926, and Dick. Those two were born in the Covenant.
But it was Uncle Lonnie told me that Dad had done something that he was frightened, and so he took to I'll call it the Bad Hills, and he ran away is what he did. And so they sent out a search party, and they couldn't find him because Dad kept dodging them. And when they finally did find him, they, for some reason, they respected it, and so they had decided to adopt him into the tribe, and that's when they gave him that Indian name.
Well, all I can say is that and I didn't see it, but they said that there was a record in Browning, Montana, where Dad had been accepted in the tribe of the Blackfoot Indians in the reservation there. And when he was, why, of course, they give him a name, and the name that they give Dad was Nacimiento Non Payen. The interpretation of the name was a little devil always in trouble or something like
Raising
that.
hell for nothing. Raising hell for nothing. The Urbans and the Jorgensens, well, they had quite a life chasing each other, going with each other. Like I say, I know throughout the Depression, Uncle Tom and Uncle Marley and Dad, one of them would find a job. They never found a job for one person. They always found three positions.
A few years ago, I located the property that I was born on. Connie Holbrook, which her father was Jorgensen, Will Jorgensen. She took me out to the place where I was born. The old building or home where I was born has been torn down. It was back in the field, and there's a modern home built on the front. It's in the mouth of Weber Canyon, south of Ogden. And my mother always told me I was born in Ogden. So I thought it was Weber County. And that's what I put in my records. And then when I got my birth certificate, a copy of it, I realized that I was born in Davis County, in South Weber Precinct. The place that Connie took me to, you turn south, and just before you go up on the tableland, you know, there's a hill there. There's a house on the left if you're facing south. And she said there was a cabin or a small home back in the field where I was born, and of course it's not there anymore.
At the time.
Daddy was farming at that time. Doris was born in Ogden, and where, just what the address was where she was born, I don't know. This was 2 years later, so evidently we stayed in Ogden a couple of years. You know, I get the idea from reading Frank's history that they were, when they lived in Ogden, Daddy and Uncle Marley were hired out to wheat farmers, or because they talked about playing in the wheat after it was threshed, and it was on a hillside, and they couldn't see why the wagons didn't tip over. And well, Charles was born in March 14th in 1919, and Frank was born 2 years later on March 3rd. And then I was born, I'm right in the middle. I was born June 10th in 1924. Frank was born in 21. He is 3 years older than I am. And then Doris was born in 1926. And Dick was born in, that was April 14th. Charles was born on the 14th, and Doris was born on the 14th of April. And then Dick was born 10 years, when I was 10 years. Just short. I was 10 years in June, and he was born the 26th of February, just prior to 10 years.
But Dad was good to us, and this is the reason we did so much traveling. He felt that was his obligation to make sure that Mom had food to put on the table for us kids.
We never were
And
in
so
a supermarket.
We never missed a meal. We didn't even have to postpone one, because there was no food in the house. Wendell is really the first Christmas that I remember. And I remember how Mom was washing dishes and they heard Santa on the rooftop, and so Dad helped us run around trying to find Santa Claus around the house. We never did find him, but when we got back, he'd been there, and Mom was still washing dishes. And then the time, though, that we were in Nevada at the copper pits, and Dad and Uncle Marley built frames, had floors in it off the ground, and stretched tents. Well,
Well, it was at Kimberly. We weren't too far from the Ruth
Ruth mine.
open copper pit.
That was Ely, wasn't it?
well,
Well,
Ely,
Ely
Ruth,
was
and
down below.
Yeah.
We
Kimberly.
from
They're all
Ely
right
we would
there
go up
together.
to Kimberly.
Oh, but we lived up in a tent.
Well, that was
House.
at Kimberly.
Oh, really? I thought it was Ely.
Oh no,
Oh, boy.
Kimberly.
I'm learning things.
Yeah. Then it was up there where Chuck and I found where the engineers or whoever had stored their dynamite, their caps and fuse. We found them. We thought the fuse just made real good lassos. And the fuses looked like 22 shells that had been fired. So we put them in our pocket, not knowing how dangerous they were. And all I know is that my dad had a good temper. He was willing to share it.